I had to confront my own shame and doubt and self-judgment about failing as a husband or as a father. So that was very complicated, very, very complicated for me.
Welcome to The Details with Allison Kahler, a space for real divorce stories and grounded conversations with experts, helping you find clarity and courage as you step into a future that may look different than you expected and better than you thought possible. My guest today is Luke Entrup. Luke is a coach who works with men navigating relationship challenges and divorce. He also works with executives on leadership, culture, and strategy. We explore Luke's own experience with divorce and how it was the catalyst for the two most transformational years of his life, and how that shapes his coaching work with men today. We cover conscious bachelorhood, erotic connection, and masculine and feminine energies. I can't wait to hear what you think. Let's get into my conversation with Luke. Welcome to The Details, Luke.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. Allison, I love what you're doing with the show, and looking forward to the conversation today.
Excellent. And you have the honor of being our first male guest on the show. So welcome.
Okay. All right. Look forward to that.
Well, as we start all of our episodes here on The Details, Luke, can you share the story of your divorce?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I was married to a wonderful woman. I have two beautiful children with her. We met in college and fell in love as young 20-somethings, and life happened. Things became really challenging in the marriage, and it was clear that eventually it became clear that we could no longer meet each other's needs. And I think quite a bit of resentment and negativity kind of accumulated in the marriage. And there was a process that we went through that I certainly went through personally, and I think she went through her own version of it, of discerning what was the right path here. It was a very confusing time. It was a very intense time, especially with two young children, right? The lifelong bond of having children together obviously would always be there, but questions about, do we continue trying to work on this, or are we at some sort of impasse where it makes sense to end the marriage? And I determined for myself, and she had her own version of discernment, to part ways as partners. And it's a very complicated, very intense few years. The one thing I'll say about it is I'm grateful for that time of discernment, of really getting in deep conversation about my needs, her needs, and making attempts to try to meet each other's needs and bringing in help and support through therapists and coaches to try to really make it work, especially with two young children. At the end of the day, I know we both, at this point, almost 9 years on, realized that was absolutely the right decision. At the time, it wasn't clear, though, right? It was very not clear, a lot of confusion. But because we slowed down and really went through that process of really trying to understand each other's needs and trying to meet them and trying to shake up the relationship any way we could, I think we both kind of have been able to put our heads on the pillow at the end of the day and know that we really did try to make it work. And in the end, it was a very catalytic experience for both of us, not just in our relationship to future partners, but also relationship to self. It was very, very transformative in that regard.
I am so excited to unpack that and how it links to the work that you do today. But just before we dive into that, I'm curious about that discernment phase, right? You mentioned confusion being one of the emotions you experienced. What were some of the other emotions during that time?
Yeah, well, I mentioned resentment, right?
Yeah.
I think there was a lot of accumulated resentment. And I think if I were to take the point of view that the marriage failed, right, which is, we hear about like failed marriages. If I were to take that point of view, I would say that I did not tend to the relationship. I kind of checked out. I became absent. I was focused on work. I was focused on my own internal struggles and not placing my attention or my awareness on her or the relationship. And it really had this impact where she became frustrated about that, resentful, and then I became resentful about her resentment. And there was this downward spiral, right? So I'd say resentment was a big one. And with that, there's like anger in that and frustration. There was also this sense of like duty identity, right? It's not less of an emotion. The emotion beneath it would be like guilt or shame that if I left, the identity that I have for myself and who I am with my friends and family and in the community, it would be shattered because my own identity was that of having it all together and being very successful in a certain way and having the perfect family and the perfect relationship. And I had to confront my own shame and doubt and self-judgment about failing as a husband or as a father. So that was very complicated, very, very complicated for me. And then just extreme sadness, right? Like feeling what I hoped and dreamed this marriage would be and expected it to be and was banking on and counting on it being a certain way. And then seeing that crumble and just the hole that left in my heart and in my being. So, yeah.
What's it like 9 years later to kind of think back on this experience and kind of where you are now versus how you felt at that time?
It's remarkable. I truly, truly am so grateful that a few things. First of all, that she is the mother of my children and that we did have this experience of being partners, mostly like a pretty great marriage. It was very successful until it wasn't, right? And when I think back about the period of separation, discernment, divorce, it was absolutely one of the most catalytic 2 years of my life. It completely changed who I am from the inside out because once I held this very sacred thing, I started to question this thing that I had set up in my life, then everything was on the table for examination, including how I parented my children, what I was doing for my work in the world, how I was showing up with my friends. It just opened up this massive opportunity to take a deeper look and kind of take some radical ownership about all the ways I had set up my life in a misaligned way that was not true to who I really was. And so it opened up this period of growth and self-awareness and kind of recreating my life from the inside out. That is now, I feel like I'm standing on a much stable, more honest ground with much more integrity here 9 years later. So I'm super grateful for it. And the funny thing is, her and I, we talk in contact almost every day because of
co-parents.
She feels the same way. She's like, she's like, thank you for helping us get through this because gosh, I'm in such a different place in my life. Who I am, my relationship to myself is so much better. So
and if you can share a little bit around what are the things that unlocked that transformation? Like, how did you go from confusion, resentment, anger, sadness to this catalytic transformation? What were the tools and things that supported you through that?
Yeah, I mean, structurally, first of all, we worked it psychotherapeutically initially, and then it became clear in that process, like we were not going to solve our challenges in the psychotherapeutic setting. So then we worked with coaches, we worked on our erotic connection. So there was a lot of work and investment and calling in help to try to make it work. And then when it became clear it was not working, I worked with a coach for a year. I leaned into men's work and getting support from other men and did a lot of kind of personal psychotherapy to try to just make meaning and discern. You go through that process. But very specifically, I think what was helpful, I remember these conversations so clearly where for me, my coach was like, he asked me, what are your needs that you have in relationship? If you were to list your top 5 needs and then look at whether she's meeting them right now or not. And from there, I was able to see I have some pretty serious unmet needs. I invited her through a similar process. And so we came together and said, this is what I would need from you in order to stay married. And then I said, let's take 3 months and our purpose is to try to meet each other's needs as best we can, just all in. And it became clear to me within about 3 weeks that she was unable to meet my needs. And probably similarly, I was unable to meet hers. And it became very clear. And we still stayed together for a year, right? Just to try to make it work. But it was that process of here's what I would need. That really made that process very clear because it required me really having a relationship with myself and my own needs in a way that was not diluted.
Well, and what I love about that is two things, and keep me honest if I'm getting this right, but one is it sounds like discernment was both an individual process that you each went through and a collective process of coming together and deciding. And second, there were some actual, maybe exercises, maybe that's not the right word, but like frameworks to help you think through the discernment. For me, discernment just felt like 2 to 3 years of confusion and like, should I stay? Should I go? And actually having something like, what are your needs? Can this person meet them? Some structure to help you really evaluate, how do I get to this answer in a way that makes sense for me, makes sense for us? Sounds like it was really useful in getting to the right answer. Is that right?
Yes, and I'm so grateful to have had an amazing coach to help me with that.
Yeah.
And I'll add, you're pointing out structures. There was another structure. There were a couple of other structures that were helpful in that, as you're saying, collective, the interpersonal piece. Another one was using a clearing process tool because there was just so much resentment, toxicity, like buildup that like, could we try to clear some of the past debris? You know?
And what does that actually look like for people that are maybe not familiar with that term? What is clearing?
Clearing is like, there's something in you as my partner that I feel frustrated about, I have resentment about. How do I speak to that without doing it in a way that causes further harm in the relationship? So it's a dialogue technique. So we were using something called intentional dialogue. There's several versions of this, nonviolent communication. It's a model of like a few steps about how you bring some sort of emotionally charged topic to your partner or anyone in a way that doesn't cause further harm, but allows you to speak to the truth. And it requires both people to agree to use this model because part of it is listening on the other side and reflecting, right? So, sharing like, this is what happened, here's how I felt about it, this is the story I made up about you, and kind of moving through some of those steps. And then, it helps, if nothing else, it doesn't always resolve the issue, the underlying dynamic, but it creates understanding and empathy, right? That's what it is as well. So.
Yeah. I've heard Brene Brown use that one a lot. Like the story I'm making up here is X, Y, and Z. And it just diffuses the tension rather than like, you always do X, Y, and Z, right? It's like, that's probably not going to land you at a good spot.
And the beauty of that sentence stem, the story I'm making up about you or about this situation is ... The beauty of it is I'm owning that it's my interpretation. But at the same time, if I use that sentence stem, I can say just about anything. There's a real elegance in it being a truth serum of just... then just you can kind of unload any judgment you have if you're owning it as such, right?
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned clearing. Was there anything else that you found structurally useful?
So the other thing I did is as the discernment process got a little further along and there were, like maybe we just need to like see other people and all of that, I did a thing where I was not dating anyone else and I did a bit of closed it up for myself and was in a place of, pausing on all contact that was anyway flirty with other women, and went through a period of kind of cleansing myself around my relationship to women, which was very helpful. And I can talk a little bit more about that process because it was a little bit independent of discernment. Yeah. But that led, to your point, it led to this this just being catalytic to my own transformation, because then I was examining all the relationships of my past and how I got to this point in a marriage that was not the marriage I wanted to be in. Right. Yeah.
So tell us more about that. So beyond the discernment phase, what were some of these things that you did that led to that catalyst?
Yeah. So taking a pause. And that, for me, that started at 3 months. And the commitment was no flirting, no kind of seduction, no porn. It was very much like any energy I had towards the feminine or women, that I channel that back into my own excavation of these deeper dynamics that were driving what got me into this relationship that was wholly misaligned for me, right? So it was done in conjunction with deep psychotherapeutic work. It was done in conjunction with spending a lot of time in nature. This is like, I basically replaced her or women with spending a lot of time at the beach, in the forest, puttering in my backyard, And like letting that be my relationship to the feminine and let that nourish me. I spent a lot of time with my buddies, men's group, hiking trips, backpacking trips. And then I got to see my habitual patterns around how I relate to women from a place that's not the best. It's like trying to get some unmet need or some hole in me filled. So it's this concept of like dating yourself, right? And what started as 3 months turned into 6 months. And it was a very important phase of my life of going through this kind of cleanse or this pause. So, at the end, I felt it was like much more ready and capable of entering into an actual relationship on the other side of that, right? That was aligned.
So what was different after that 6 months for you? What did you learn through that time in nature away from that version of the feminine?
I also did an inventory. It's kind of loosely based on like the 12 steps or some of the writings of, I'm trying to remember the author. Anyway, the idea was I went back and I looked at all of the women that I had felt like maybe I had harmed or had like hadn't left in a good way or somehow didn't show up as my best self. And I actually went back and I reached out to several of them to kind of like make amends and come to them with an ownership of like, hey, I'm examining the ways that I did not show up well in relationship to past partners and lovers. And I want to own that that I maybe hurt you in this way and apologize and kind of try to make it right as best I could. And had several of those conversations. So like, there was just less of this kind of debris that was weighing me down emotionally and psychically. And I did that amends with her as well. I did an amends with my mother. It was like my sister. It was like reaching out to the women of my life and updating my relationship so that when I came out, it was like I was clear about what I wanted in a partner. I also was way more rooted in myself and just kind of fell in love with myself again, and like the ability to be alone and be in solitude and have that not feel lonely. So that as I entered back into kind of dating, it was like somebody would have to be very compelling to kind of pull me off of this kind of more rooted place, right? And not just going after the next person that showed up, right? I think that was the big takeaway for me.
Yeah. I mean, you said something there that really struck me, but the sense of solitude, but not feeling lonely, right? And I think for those of us that have been in marriages that didn't work, even though you're with someone, it can feel very lonely at times. And that comfort and connection with self to say that actually I feel pretty happy and pretty content in this life of solitude. I may want a partner eventually, but being comfortable in this space is actually a big time of growth before you're ready to re-partner.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's also, I don't think there's a one size fits all for everyone. I think there was a period in my journey, and I coach men around this process a lot, and it's different for each man, right? That sometimes if someone's been very, very like malnourished, maybe even like emotionally or erotically, or that they've just been in a very malnourished, dry relationship, that there is a period of that you just need to kind of get out there and see how you interact with people and find, as long as it's done through the lens of leaving people better than you found them, it's possible to just be in a place where you're not dating to find your partner, but you're dating for deep connections, and even if that's erotic connections, like totally fine. Like sometimes that is a chapter someone needs to be in, especially after a really hard, difficult breakup, that when done well and with intention and integrity, for some people, that is a chapter that is necessary. There was a chapter for me where that was absolutely necessary. And then eventually most people arrive at, I really do want a deep, meaningful relationship. And so that this kind of reset needs to happen where they really do anchor into themselves again. So it's different. There's not a one size fits all on the sequencing around that.
Yeah. Well, I want to come back to that piece and dig into it a little bit more. I'm sure the listeners will be very curious about that. And they're like, oh, I get to go have some fun time before I'm finding a new partner. But tell us, just to start, you mentioned you worked with a coach through your own experience. You now coach men. Talk to us a little bit about what does that entail for people that aren't as familiar with, like, what does a coach even do in this space, and how do you work with men?
Yeah. Well, this all came from, kind of what I said at the top, which was the most transformative period of my life, one of the most transformative periods, was this 2 years going through the divorce. And I've been a coach for many years. I work with executive leaders and I lead retreats. It was so impactful to me. And so what really drives me around working with men is helping them through this period of like where anything in their life is on the table and they can really redesign themselves, remake themselves in a very radical way. So it's very interesting and compelling work as a coach to be in the trenches with someone as they're going through something very intense, usually very painful, very complicated, but also has a massive opportunity to kind of redefine who they are. And what it looks like is it's usually doing a lot of one-on-one calls to support them in their discernment process. So some of the process I mentioned, in their own self-reflection. Sometimes I'll work with couples around this, around their own discernment. And what I think is unique, I think there's something unique about the gendered experience around this, right? Like being able to draw on the experience of being born a man and being a man in today's cultures and that expectation, how that gets layered onto a marriage. And so I love, it gives me a lot of joy to work with men around the topic of redefining the type of man they want to be in the modern world, right? Yeah, and it's usually like, I'll work with somebody for somewhere between 3 months to a year, and I text them, they text me, we do phone calls. It's kind of like I kind of become their foxhole buddy is what I like to say, or, it's just I'm in their corner as things come up. And some of it's like, how do I talk to my co-parent about this? Or some of it is, how do I decide if I stay or go? So one of my favorite things to do is somebody comes to me and they say, I'm not sure if I want to be married. And 6 months later, they're like madly in love with their wife again. That's like my favorite thing to do.
I love that because it's like the goal isn't necessarily to drive people towards divorce. It's to acknowledge that this is a reality that many of us go through. Yeah. But if you can do the work on self, if you can have the support of a coach, a therapist, all of these different resources, and reconnect with your partner and stay together, that's a great outcome too, right? But having those resources around you to get to the right decision versus just dragging it out and staying in those feelings that you mentioned at the beginning of confusion, resentment, pain, shame, all those things. It's like that place is just hell. So getting out of that with the support of someone like you is so helpful. I want to hear a little bit around the sort of gendered experience that you talked about. So what do you notice are some of the similarities or differences between men and women as they experience this?
Sure. So I think a good place to start around this topic is to think about it beyond gender initially and just think about energies of like masculine, feminine energies. And this can be in same-sex or hetero couples, doesn't really matter. Like in me, I have both a masculine part and a feminine part, right? And it's not true, universally true, but for most men, they're usually a little more masculine, right? And a little more, women are typically a little more feminine. So it's just teasing it out a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. There's a sense in the masculine of like the priority is around purpose and mission, and that it's much more about awareness than emotion, right? My masculine is much more about my own consciousness of being able to look over my life and see, where my feminine, the feminine in me, is much more of the body, of emotions, of responsiveness, of being able to follow the impulse of love, right? I think for me, that's a helpful framing to say, like, we as men, part of my work with men is being able to get clear in my masculine, but also being able to cultivate and tend the parts of my own heart that have deep feeling and freeing up my body to be able to be more relaxed and liberated. So, and then as far as the gender piece, oftentimes I work, less so these days, but I used to do a lot of work with women around breakups and divorce as well. I've realized like I'm much more useful with men. And, I think the experience for men is there's often a sense of duty to the family that is complicated. Mm-hmm. There's often a sense of more about the story and the story about the challenges of the marriage going awry than the actual feelings of it, right? So oftentimes with men, it's like slowing us down enough to actually allow emotion to be information and help inform some sort of decision we need to make. It's often about honoring a man's need for space and a need for self-reflection and even self-reliance. So oftentimes, especially when children are involved, the dynamic that shows up in nearly every marriage is that there's like, my co-parent and I used to call it the battle for life force energy. It's like, who has it worse around not having enough time to really tend to themselves, especially with young children. So getting a man a bit of a break from work and family in a way that is generative and helpful and nourishing so that he doesn't have to leave the marriage, right? And then making sure she also, or the partner also has that, right? And leading that process of making sure everybody has some break, a break so that they can go do the things I talked about earlier around being outside or being with buddies, or this is like the kind of the maybe the less useful version of this is like the man cave, right? It's like a trope, but there's like this inherent wisdom where men need to, our nervous systems get overwhelmed and we need a place to off-gas that. The male nervous system is a little denser when you look at it through an emotional lens. And so we need that time to kind of metabolize all of the stress of our lives. Otherwise, we bring that into the relationship that shows up as either reactive anger or just being vacant and checked out, or both. Right.
Well, it's so interesting that you mentioned this. My ex-husband and I did not have kids, but I imagine the dynamic for some couples could look like if the man is the primary breadwinner and working, and as you said, needs that time and space away from work, away from family to recharge. If the woman in maybe some of these gender stereotyped relationships is at home with the kids, I could see how some of that resentment might pop up of like, I've been with the kids all day, like, and you're coming home from work and you need to resort to your man cave. Like, I could see how that would get to that battle, as you said, of like, who's got it worse, who needs the space more, et cetera. So can you talk a little bit about like, how does that dynamic work in relation? Like that might be the unmet need of the man, but for the woman that's in that relationship, how do they work together through that conflict of we both need our time and space?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. And of course, this is not, I just want to be really clear, this is obviously not every male-female
relationship. Sure.
This happens in same-sex marriages as well. And it's sometimes it has to do with kids, sometimes it's not. So it's hard to kind of make it one size fits all. It's a little unfair, but I do think there is like kind of this archetypal, you're describing an archetypal dynamic that exists in a lot of marriages. And I see it as a pattern, right? So how do you work through it? The first is becoming clear that the depletion, right? Somebody has to lead the process of finding a new way of relating and setting up the structure of the life design. And it's best, I think it's a great place for the man to lead. Doesn't need to happen. Yeah. Sometimes what happens is when there's like another trope of like the nagging wife, right? And it's like her needs are not met. So there's like a needling that happens. And over time, it leads to a shutting down of him. So it's like, how can she bring her unmet needs to him in a way that is enticing and is about connection and not complaint, right? Mm-hmm. Underneath every complaint is an unmet need. So how do we bring our place of desire for connection and needs and not complaint? So that's a way to work that dynamic a little bit. But at the end of the day, I think the most important thing is that we get clear about what our needs are and what we need in order to like really be in with each other. And we have that conversation, then we try to attempt to meet each other's needs, right? And so somebody has to lead that. Somebody has to step out and say like, something needs to change here. This isn't working for me. And it can come from anyone.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the piece that you mentioned around sort of the erotic, right? Around the needs that we have in relationship, how that gets met or unmet, and also kind of the exploration that happens maybe post-divorce as you're finding ways to meet those needs. So how do you work with men through that piece, knowing that's probably one of the main drivers of dissatisfaction in a relationship?
Yeah, well, the erotic is a manifestation of deeper creative energy, right? So when a relationship starts to fall flat, erotically, it's not just falling flat erotically. There's other areas of the relationship that it's gone stale. And when we are in a place where we are not, as humans, where we're cut off erotically, then we're cut off from our own creativity, or we're cut off from our own sense of vitality and aliveness. So part of the allure always of leaving a marriage for people that are wired this way is like, oh, there's life again on the other side of it. Right. And so let's just assume that we've done everything we can to save a marriage, but we're also, and we know that that marriage has to end, right? Let's just assume that's all that work has happened. There's often a pull towards that reigniting that erotic aliveness through finding new partners or just being in some sort of flirty dynamic. And I think that there's like inherently, there's nothing wrong with that. And there's this old line that I love, which is like, and just to be clear, this does not apply to everyone, but it speaks to a certain thing, which is like, how do you get, the best way to get over someone is to get under someone else.
Yeah, I've heard of that one.
Right? So there's something kind of inherent, there's like inherent wisdom about that. Sometimes I'll work with my clients around this idea of conscious bachelorhood, which is to say, I am not in a place where I am dating to find a long-term partner or a life partner. However, I'm dating with a high level of integrity and honesty to say that I am looking for deep connections. I'm looking for even erotic experiences, but to just be very clear that I am not available. This is not an exploration around life partnership for me. And the challenge with that is you can bring that. So I work with men that are mostly interested in dating women, and they can bring that to a woman, and a woman may hear something else. She may hear what she wants to hear, which is like, I think this is the guy that could be the father of my children, and I'll kind of ride this phase out with him until he's ready, right? Which is, so the key here for men is to be very clear what you're available for. And then also there's a step further, which is to say, feeling into any sort of potential connection you might have to see whether she actually can handle something that would be more just physical and doesn't have the stable commitment of a long-term monogamous relationship. If you feel like she is not able to do that, do not do that, because that is not, it's a campfire rule. We leave everyone better than we found them and we don't want to be hurting people intentionally, right? So that's kind of the setup for conscious bachelorhood. And most men, frankly, like need some version of that after a big breakup or divorce. Pretty much all of them that I've seen need some version, not all, but most need some version of that. And I think it's helpful in a certain way. And then eventually it usually runs its course. And most men need or want something deeper and more stable and committed, right?
So if I'm a divorced woman and I find myself on the dating apps going out with a guy who is in conscious bachelorhood, I should not wait it out. I should say he's like, if I'm looking for a partnership, I'm like, I'm not going to change him. I just got to like, just let that one go. Right. Is that the advice you give?
Yeah. I would really listen to what people are saying and what they're putting on the apps, look at what's in their profile, like really hear them. Right. And it's okay to ask questions and get under the surface about these things. And I think I am a huge proponent of when you're dating with intention to meet your partner, that you go very slow. Right. It's like, take your time, take 3 months before you ever go all the way sexually. Right. Because once those bonding hormones flush the system, it really dilutes our vision of what we're actually seeing. And we want to really get to know someone and go super slow when we're in that type of dating, right?
Frickin' oxytocin, right?
Yeah. Hell of a drug.
I love hormone. Yeah. What does that transition look like for men from, okay, I got what I wanted out of conscious bachelorhood and I'm ready for moving from dating with intention to finding a partner? Like, maybe I'm not saying this right, but like, what does success for conscious bachelorhood look like and graduating beyond that? Or is that not even the right way to think about it?
Yeah, it's different for everyone. Some people need to do that cleansing period first, and then they want to go do a little sacred bachelorhood. Some people need that right away. I mean, some people are coming into that with like already either an affair happened, or these days people open up their marriages as like a Hail Mary, right? So there's all sorts of versions of this that are already happening. So I don't know that there's like a total linear sequencing, but I would say, I mean, for me, I did a little period of like conscious bachelorhood, and for me, it was just so unsatisfying at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. Yes, it was like, wow, beautiful women. Like I had the chance to like have these erotic experiences with the like women I dreamed about when I was married, right? Very nourishing. There's something really beautiful about that. And wholly unsatisfying for anyone that has any level of depth and wants something, meaningful and committed. At least that's how I'm wired, and I think a lot of people are wired. Some people would disagree with me about that, and that's fine. But there's a sense of it becomes a little unsatisfying, and you want something deeper. And then that pivot looks like getting really clear on what do you want in a relationship. And then step 2 is how do you want to feel when you're around them? Yeah. So there's the checklist, the green flag list that everybody has, and then there's the deeper question of like, what's the embodied experience that I'm having when I'm around the person that I would want to build a life with? Yeah. I think both are important, right?
What I love about that is you said it's how do I want to feel when I'm in relationship, right? Versus what can be seen as like the checklist in what you want in someone else, right? It's like, what does a relationship bring out in me? How do I become the best version of myself? How do I feel in relation with someone else? I think we don't think about that enough, or at least I certainly don't. It's like, what do I want in a man? Here's the list of the things. And it's just a different way of thinking. And maybe both are important, but I think we leave that one out too much around how do I want to feel?
Yeah, well, I think we're redefining relationship kind of collectively right now, right? In the old days, marriage was very much about safety, stability, security. It was about land. It was about, we're kind of hardwired for this institution of marriage to be about the family unit and financial security, right? And kind of just basic safety, because we're hardwired as tribal creatures. Now, a man is not needed for a woman to have a baby. A man is not needed for a woman to fully support herself financially. Thank God we're in a totally different era where any human that's born, at least in this country, that of a certain kind of class status can do anything they want as far as financial. It's kind of like open your hand and it can happen. Marriage is not driven by safety, security, and stability so much anymore in a lot of, at least in the circles that I'm in. I understand other parts of the world and other cultures, that's not the case. But for the most part in the West, that's the case, right? And so what is the point of marriage? What is the point of relationship? What if, and I think this is the change we're going through, what if the point of marriage now is it's a place where we grow to more fully realize who we are in the world? It's a place of self-examination and spiritual growth, emotional growth, psychological growth, that we bring. It's a way that our partner can become the person that evokes the best in us and the worst in us as a way of growing. And so if that's the framing of relationship, that it's all about growth and transformation, and then we start question about how do I feel around them, and that becomes way more important, right? So
sign me up for some of that, please. Yeah, that's the way I would want to feel in relationship with someone. Yeah. I think that makes a ton of sense. I'm curious if you think about some of the clients that you've worked with, some of the men that you've supported over the years, what are some of the, without giving away specifics of individuals, just what are some of the transformations you've seen in them beyond the transformation you've experienced yourself?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that's why we do what we do. Just so many. But I mean, one of my favorite stories, still a client all these years later, came to me like wanting to leave his marriage, 2 young children. Essentially, like his yoga teacher sent him to me. And that was about the extent of his own journey, right? Of any sort of examining his own heart and mind. And it led to quite a tremendous change in his relationship to his wife and his children. And they're still together and consistently working on the relationship. And the work has extended for him to look at how he can be a better father, and now what it means for him to be a man in the world, and really metabolizing and digesting what he was given around the messages of what a man looks like from his kind of family, to redefining that and really staking a claim. Like, that's one example, right? And one of the things I loved, some of the work we did, it was like I had him write a manifesto about being a man, what it meant for him to be a man. Like one of the most beautiful things I've ever read. It's like, because it's not just about, figuring out whether he wanted to stay or go in his marriage. It was like really figuring out who he wanted to be on this planet. And I think that's the promise of, that's the promise of all of this, is like taking this very intense, painful, confusing time and transmuting it into a chance for deep clarity about who we are.
Yeah, I love that. As we get towards the end of our conversation today, if some of the people are in that discernment phase, whether men or women, are there other kind of exercises or things like you recommend people do that might be good things to reflect on coming out of today's call?
Yeah, there's a few things. So sometimes I'll have people write a letter, right? Because sometimes it's much harder to just be in a conversation. And if you can write a letter about, here's what, is really hard for me about this. Here's my unmet needs. Here's where I have failed in this relationship, and bring that. Those letters sometimes are just exactly what is needed to provide clarity, right? So that's a big one. Just being, honesty, taking the chance of being direct. When you're in that process, what keeps people from that process is fear that their truth or their doubt or their resentment will lead to an unraveling of everything. And so I think that's often the thing that impedes real connection and or clarity, right? And so it just takes some guts. It takes some courage to be the one to just say the thing. And I would say I don't know if that's a tool, but maybe it's more of a philosophy to just say, if you're in that process and you're confused, you be the one that takes a stand for something better. Yeah. And if that better means that we're better apart, then so be it.
Yeah. I mean, what I take away from what you're saying is just this posture of ownership for everything in the process and responsibility, a sense of courage. And those are hard and scary things to do, but ultimately they lead you to the future that you want and the type of transformation that you're talking about here. Mm-hmm. So as we wrap up today's conversation, what do you hope sticks with listeners, whether they're men or women, from today's call?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think about oftentimes when people think about divorce, and again, they're like, we're kind of playing in tropes a little bit here, but there's just this thing about like hating on one's ex and like making a joke about one's ex. And anytime I see that, and I'm certainly guilty of it myself, I'm not immune to it, but I think it's like this very convenient escape from really examining our part in what led to a marriage that's misaligned. And so my hope and my challenge is that anybody that's listening to this can really examine deeply their own part, because when you can do that, it's a path of liberation. It's a path, whether it liberates the relationship or it purely liberates your own sense of who you are in the world. There's freedom in that, right? To just really, to turn down the toxicity and the resentment, and to turn down the projection, and to turn up the ownership, I think is, for me, it's been part of the journey. Again, I'm not perfect in this regard. My co-parent would tell you that. And some of my
We'll have her on as a guest.
So I'm not perfect in it, but I just know I feel much better when I do my best to view her in the most positive light and to share, to speak to others about her in that way. So,
Well, if people are interested in working with you or following along on what you're putting out into the world, where can they find you?
Yeah, they can find me at lukeentrup.com. It's where I take the inbounds for my men's coaching. And then I'm on most of the social media channels, Luke Entrup. And I also do a little work with fathers and sons around rites of passage. So I've got a program where we take 10 to 14-year-old boys and their fathers out into the wilderness and help them get more connected and honor that passage from childhood into adolescence. So that's at father-son-connection.com. And so hopefully that's helpful.
Wonderful. I am sure it will be. I have already referred several of my friends and contacts to Luke, just given the wonderful work that you do. And I can say that I've heard wonderful things from the people that work with you. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing in the world. Thank you for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure to have you, Luke.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to The Details with Allison Kahler. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And please consider sharing it with someone who might benefit from it. New episodes drop every Tuesday.